Hello and welcome everyone to a new edition of the Future Food series by ProVeg Incubator and NX Food. I am Albrecht Wolfmeyer, head of the ProVeg Incubator, and my co-host is Fabio Zimsen. Hi, Fabio.
Hi, Albrecht. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I'm also very happy that we have today's session about fermentation and that we have so many or such a big audience who is now watching us live talking about fermentation, the different shapes of fermentation, let's say it like this. And I'm also very excited that we have four really good speakers that have so much insights into the space and not only founded their company, but that they are specialized in fermentation and can give us their view on how fermentation is used today and what you can make out of a new concept. So, but before we start with our panelists, Albrecht, tell me what's going on your side.
Thanks, Fabio. Yeah, it's this time of the year, that special time, 2 times per year, we take in a new cohort of startups. So we just selected another 8 new startups from all around the world that are joining us for a 12-week program. And it's really focusing on food tech and unique and new ingredients. And half of those companies are actually working with fermentation, different types of fermentation. And at ProVeg International, it's also important to know, and I would like to let you know about the New Food Conference coming up in October from the 10th to the 11th, co-located at Anuga, the food fair in Cologne. It's a hybrid event. Due to Corona, it has to be limited in some way, but at the same time, it's a global event and everybody can join. So check this online or come to Cologne. And one core topic or one key topic on the agenda there is also fermentation. So yeah, what's up on your side, Fabio?
Thank you very much, Albrecht. On my side, it's happened a lot recently. This is one of my last sessions that I'm doing as a representative of NX Foods, since I founded with 4 partners Syntenes, a growth fund that's investing in conscious consumption concepts and products. We have just started and are looking, of course, for interesting startups that are raising Series A and B rounds. So if you're interested, please feel free to get in contact with us. The other thing is that we just today published a new white paper as NX Food about personalized nutrition. So if you're interested in personalized nutrition, then feel free to go on our website. You see different perspectives on this field, since personalized nutrition is one of also the big topics of the future when it comes to food tech and food solutions. And the team of NX Food has looked in all the different concepts here and made also quite a good, compendium of insight into the personalized nutrition market. So check out nxfood.com. You will get all the information there in the new personalized nutrition white paper. And as you said, Albrecht, there's also very interesting events in the next couple of weeks. Not only the New Food Conference by ProVeg, it happens at the Anuga, the biggest world food fair, and there's also a lot happening there. So and we are of course also partnering with them. So if you're interested, please have a look at the Anuga, and those of you who are there, it would be great to meet you all. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks,
for today's event, I just want to say that we are using the hashtag Future Food Series. So if you want to write about it, send a comment or something like this, please feel free to use the hashtag. And Albrecht, I'm not sure if you're still there, but your camera just turned off.
Whoops.
Yeah, there you are again. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Let's get started. Or anything else as a preliminary comment, or we want to dive right into the panelist introductions and the discussion?
Yeah, perfect. So let's go. We are very happy, as I said, to have 4 very, very interesting speakers today. And I just want to start with Jeremy from GFI, who's really a specialist in this field. Welcome you, Jeremy. We are really happy to have you here with us today. Please give an introduction and show us what your perspective on fermentation is.
Sure. Thank you all for having me here. I'm delighted to be joining with you. My name is Jeremy Chignal. I am a relatively new addition to the Good Food Institute's team of scientists. My specialty area is in fermentation. So I just joined GFI about 2 months ago. So I've been quickly learning about the GFI sort of mission and progress. And it's an exciting time to be in fermentation, certainly an exciting time to be in alternative protein in general, but fermentation is really just starting to take off. And it's amazing to me because I feel like I've experienced fermentation from the perspective of sort of traditional fermentation, which is, you know, what we all know and love, something like sauerkraut or yogurt. That's sort of what we think of when we think of fermentation. And that's, you know, as Fabio mentioned, I think that's a technology that's been with, you know, that humans have had for generations, for thousands of years. You know, we've been drinking beer for quite a while. You know, it's an old technology, but now it's starting to find its role in a new food landscape. And it's a really exciting time to be in a part of fermentation. Just really fast about my background. I have my educational background is in biology and engineering. My PhD is in chemical engineering. I did a lot of different types of analyses for fermentation systems based on omics technologies. After my schooling, I went to go work for DuPont as a fermentation scientist, working in lactic acid bacteria fermentation, which is, you can think of those as like your yogurt type of, and probiotics type of gut microorganisms. And after that, I changed to, I moved to Cargill, where I was a precision fermentation scientist for a number of years. And then I moved to GFI. So I have, my background is in industry in general. And so I'm excited to be here and share my perspective.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. So now on to Isabella Iglesias Musechio from Kinoko Labs, CEO and founder of that fermentation company, working on the future of whole cut meat alternatives. So Isabella, please tell us more about it.
Yeah,
and yourself.
sure. Yeah, great. Happy to be here. So as you know, I'm Isabella. I'm the CEO of Kinoko Labs, and we're working to create next generation meat alternatives, as Albrecht said, starting with whole muscle meat products grown naturally from mycelium. So we're working with a unique process of fermentation to be able to develop our mycelium into solid structures, thereby really replicating the texture of meat in a more natural way that allows us to create our alternatives with less downstream processing than plant-based alternatives. So yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into more details a little bit later on when people have questions, but we're currently in our early R&D stage. We're developing some of our next prototypes, and you know, a little info about us. We're actually at the IndieBio Accelerator in New York right now, and so you guys can tune in January to the demo day there to see the next prototypes that we'll be releasing. Yeah.
Thanks, Isabella.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Isabella. So Sebastian from Munich.
Hi, Fabio.
Hi.
I'm Sebastian, from Munich, and we founded Germany's first fermentation manufactory for fermented vegetables 5 years ago. When I'm looking into the round of speakers here today, I feel like we're the old school traditionalists, because we are only fermenting vegetables and making kimchi, and our approach back then was to make sauerkraut hip again, because in the country of the krauts, Germany, the technique and the knowledge about the technique has been completely forgotten. People don't know the differences between a pasteurized sauerkraut, which is 99% of the products you can buy in stores, and an unpasteurized, which is full of probiotic life that we are creating. And still, I believe we are producing exciting groceries that are enhanced by fermentation in two ways. One way that we make them more valuable, more beneficial for our health. and in the other way to make them more delicious and to create new flavors. And that's where I think we might come back to later. We now see that our byproducts, our products itself, can create exciting pre-materials for other food industries or ventures whatsoever. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sebastian.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. So, and now on to Chris and CEO and the co-founder at Better Nature, and they're just fermenting tempeh, but it's much more than just that, Chris, isn't it?
Yeah. No, thank you so much for having me here. I'm Chris, as Albrecht said, CEO and co-founder of Better Nature. At Better Nature, we are the world's first food tech company focused on tempeh fermentation, which I feel if you were to draw a Venn diagram of what Isabella is working on, what Sebastian's working on, we kind of sit in the middle. So tempeh fermentation is an ancient food processing technology. You know, it's been around for 300 years. It originated in Indonesia, and it typically involves the solid state fungal fermentation, which is a fancy way of saying mushroom fermentation of soybeans traditionally, to create basically a plant-based protein that has a really firm texture that is able to, in some cases, mimic that of meat, and have amazing nutritional properties. So from deriving, what we work on is that we create our own novel starter cultures and fermentation processes to basically take tempeh into the mainstream. Our ambition is to make tempeh a food product that is as widespread and well known as tofu, and be able to, I guess, help improve everyone's nutritional intake, as well as also not compromise on the flavor of the products. So using tempeh, we create a wide range of flavored tempeh products. And similar to what Sebastian's working on, I imagine, we're also working on applying our technologies on valorizing low-cost commodity crops like soybeans, but also other crops like oats or lupin beans, to create high-value ingredients that can be used in a wide variety of different industries, aside from, say, different sectors, aside from just that of plant-based meat alternatives. So I can talk forever about tempeh fermentation and just like how it's able to miraculously improve the nutritional content of really any bean, nut, legume, grain, or seed. And a little bit about me. Founded Better Nature with 3 others 3 years ago, but prior to that, did my master's in biochemistry at the University of Oxford. So had my grounding there, but Better Nature is really my first foray into the world of business.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. That was very, very helpful. And as you said, there's a cycle of fermentation, and I think it's absolutely necessary for all our audience and also the ones who are new to the topic of fermentation to get a bit in basic knowledgement about it. And I would ask you, Jeremy, maybe you can give us a bit more context how we can really structure the whole topic of fermentation a bit, since you were saying that the whole topic is taking off at the moment, and we see it also from the investments that are going into new technologies and new startups. Maybe you can give us, as I said, a bit context and how we can structure the whole topics of fermentation from biomass to precision, and why it's so taking off at the moment and such a hot topic.
Sure. Yeah. I'm really happy to be on the panel with everybody, Sebastian, Isabella, and Chris here, because it really, this panel I think really represents a good mixture of technologies that are coming online now. When I said that traditional fermentation has been, with us for many years, that's not to say that it's not exciting and fresh and new. In fact, we're only just in the past, couple of decades starting to understand, and not that we understand it all right now, but we're understanding the sort of benefits that fermented foods have for the gut the gut microbiome. You know, microbiome is such a hot topic these days. So I think that's part of why you're seeing this resurgence and renewal of interest in what Sebastian sort of mentioned were sort of technologies that maybe have been forgotten or had been forgotten. I mean, you know, sauerkraut fermentation has been around and with us for a long time, but you know, the techniques, if they're not practiced traditionally, they get lost. You know, certain styles maybe get forgotten. Same with any kind of fermented food that you might choose. So, you know, in an industrialized food landscape, you know, these sort of traditional techniques start to get forgotten, and with that, our gut microbiomes suffer. And so, you know, companies like Sebastian and like Chris are really sort of at the forefront of addressing these kinds of, and it's very much a health concern, but it's also a flavor, you know, a flavor focused endeavor. You're, you know, by having when you do, say, for example, a traditional sort of a vegetable fermentation, what you're enriching for are species that are present on the surface of these vegetables already. So they're there in the field. They come from the air. They you know, the sort of idea with microorganisms is that they're everywhere, and then the environment selects for which ones actually are there most abundantly. So you have on the surfaces of plants, like cabbage, you have lactobacillus species, Lactobacillus plantarum. Then when you put these, you know, vegetables into a certain environment, and I'm sure Sebastian can, you know, give a whole lecture on this process, but when you put them into a certain environment, these certain organisms start to become enriched. So you have lactobacillus in particular is a very common one. They will start to produce lactic acid, which then drops the pH of the culture. And that's what really starts to give that fermented flavor to things, that sort of sour, really classic sort of acidic quality. And that what that does is create an environment that only lactobacillus can really survive in, and other lactic acid bacteria that happen to be beneficial for the gut. So lactobacillus is a big one. Bifidobacteria is another big one. These are species that are being made, manufactured separately as probiotics. So you can take your pill of probiotics, or you can eat a lot of fermented foods, and you're going to be getting the, you know, a lot of the same benefits. So of course the probiotics, sometimes it's a very specialized medicine, sort of a treatment for a gut condition, but so that's sort of the traditional fermentation landscape, where you have these very ancient human technologies that now are really being rediscovered, and it's becoming a renaissance of, first of all, how do we recover that lost knowledge of how to make these foods and keep that knowledge with us going forward? And second of all, what really is the mechanistic benefit that they have in the gut, or, you know, even in other parts of the body? You know, are they contributing to your mental acuity? Are they contributing to your mood? You know, all of these sort of questions about these beneficial organisms. So I would say that in a nutshell is sort of traditional fermentation, and those are just some examples. But
would you say that the main driver of this traditional development is very much emotionally driven, and very much because we have a strong trend that people want to be more aware of where the food is coming from, and that they have a transparency on it, and that they want to eat healthy, and all these trends that are pretty much connected to the term of scratch food?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, and Sebastian, I'm sure, would have more to say on this, but, you know, my sense is that, you know, there's the feeling that, especially in the US, you know, the feeling that food has become sort of homogenized. It's the same everywhere. It's industrial. It's processed to death. You know, it's available. Anything, you can get anything you want anywhere. But it's all sort of the same, you know? And so I think that there's a real sort of a renewal of the sense of, I want something that's unique, that has some history to it, and that has these sort of incredible health benefits that you get and that maybe have been lost in humans.
And now we are coming, I wouldn't say totally to the opposite, but how we can use this technology when we are talking about precision fermentation, which is pretty much used to produce ultra processed food, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would push back on that a little bit. I think the precision fermentation, yes, you're right, it's the other end of the spectrum. So it's very much a food technology. So instead of having your sort of culture or enriching for microbes that are already there on the food, like I described, you're actually making your microorganism with the genetic sort of code beforehand, and then you're putting it into a big vat, a big fermenter, and then asking it to make the product of interest. So a great example, this technology really got going, about 100 years ago with the production of penicillin. And it really became, and also the production of butanol. These two sort of ideas, sort of medicine and fuel, have been with us for this precision fermentation sort of project for quite a while. And so that's the idea. It's usually a GMO organism. So it's a modified organism where you're putting a gene of interest into the organism, and then you're putting that, and the organism is often a yeast, or it's a bacteria, well-known bacterium like E. coli. And then you're putting it into a huge fermenter and asking it to make the product of interest, the product that is encoded for by the gene that you've put into the organism. So one good example is that it's coming online now is this company Perfect Day. So it's a sort of a great example where they were able to engineer a yeast organism to make milk proteins. And so then they put their yeast into a big vat of fermentation medium that has sugars and vitamins and things that the yeast needs, and the yeast produces milk proteins that then they can recover, and they can make a synthetic kind of a milk, an animal-free milk product that is essentially it is milk because it's milk proteins. If they add all the other things that are in milk, then they have milk. But there's no animal involved. So that's a great example of how you can use this precision fermentation approach to actually make a food product of interest. And the process is so versatile and we're good at microbiology and molecular biology and engineering, so that we can literally choose almost any product that we want to make and have a good chance of being able to make it through this method.
Okay, one last question here. Could you name us the most recent developments in technology that help to really accelerate this market? Because, as you said, the technology itself is 100 years old. And there are these alternative protein trends, which we can see in the market, and a lot of solutions that are promoted. But are there some technologies or some special kind of developments that we see at the moment which are really speeding up certain developments?
Are you referring to precision fermentation?
Yes.
I think there are two, I would say. The development that has been influential is the application of modern bioprocess techniques to these, relatively old technologies. So 100 years ago, they were making penicillin in this way, using a yeast, a fungus that produces penicillin. So they were putting that fungus into a bioreactor, and then growing it at massive scale and then recovering the penicillin. Now we don't have to use particular strains. We can choose a strain, we can put the gene in, but now we have the ability to use these massive fermenters, and we have bioprocess controls that enable us to increase the titer, meaning the concentration of the product, and the yield, and the productivity, the rate that it's happening, just an order of magnitude better than it was 100 years ago. So I think that's really the driver in many sense, and the molecular biology, obviously, the ability to do this, to change the genome. going forward, well, maybe you're going to speak about going forward later, but I would say those two, molecular biology and then modern bioprocess control techniques.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks. Just one word maybe here on the whole setup. We will have another session dedicated fully to precision fermentation. So don't worry if we can't cover all the questions people may have. It's such a vast topic, all of fermentation, but precision fermentation in itself as well. So just as a heads up. So stay tuned for that. Fabio.
Yes. So yeah, and we can thank you very much, Jeremy, for setting this in the context, and it would be great to hear from you also later what you see in the upcoming years as new developments here. So I would continue then, Albrecht, with our next speaker.
Yeah, maybe let's move on to Chris, who's at this sort of crossroads area of the fermentation technology and fermentation topic. So you mentioned that the combination of Tempe and of fermentation makes so much sense, and applying new food technology and new possibilities of doing it. And it's an IP game, and you filed several patents. So how do you marry this? When we talk to Sebastian, we'll learn more about this traditional and very techy approach in your work at Better Nature.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, Tempe fermentation is 300 years old, but over the last 300 years, I guess unlike sauerkraut fermentation, which has been forgotten, Tempe fermentation has been done the exact same way. And as Jeremy sort of mentioned, it's been scaled up in the exact same way, such that the exact same cultures are being used for basically Tempe all across the world. It's become incredibly homogenized, and you're using these monocultures of species of Rhizopus, right? I think there's really only 2 species of Rhizopus that are being used, when really Tempe fermentation can involve the co-inoculation of loads of different species of not just fungi, but also bacteria and yeasts to produce and select for the qualities that you're looking for. So, at the most simple level, Tempe fermentation is basically the marriage of pure plant-based protein, right? So typically soybeans, but as I mentioned before, really any bean, nut, legume, grain, or seed can be fermented with mushroom protein, right? So you inoculate your fungal spores, your mushroom spores with your plant-based protein substrate of choice, and you create basically this hybrid of mushroom protein and plant-based protein. It's an incredibly easy to scale process. It's a process that has massive scale. You don't need steel vats. All you really need is a warm room. And if you're in Indonesia, all you need is your backyard. Like, people just make it on the street. People make it in their own homes because it's just so warm and humid there. It's absolutely perfect for Tempe fermentation. But what we're doing here at Better Nature is that we're taking that process and we're applying a 21st century scientific lens to it. I think Tempe fermentation, as it's currently being applied all over the world, is amazing in its own right. So what it does, with soybeans in particular, is that it actually almost doubles the protein content of your initial plant-based substrate, whilst at the same time almost halving the fat content and the carbohydrate content of your plant-based substrate. So what you end up with is a product that has amazing qualities for being a plant-based meat alternative, from what is very, very simple, low-cost commodity crops, and what being processed in a method that is incredibly easy to scale. But what we're doing is that we're looking at that fermentation process at the molecular level. So we've basically sequenced the genomes of, I think, tens at the very least, maybe around 50 different species that have, through papers, been proven to be able to work in conjunction and in symbiosis with Rhizopus. And I've basically used that genomic library to select for qualities that we want to enhance in our end product. So one thing about tempeh fermentation is that it also, going back to Jeremy on the taste front, it also liberates glutamates, right? Which is the basis of umami. So you end up with a product that not only is nutritionally superior than what you start with, but also has a flavor profile that's superior that we start with. What we can do is then select for yeasts or bacteria, other species of fungi that can work in symbiosis with that base starter culture to select for umami, right? Or select for protein, or select for fat reduction or carb reduction. And in that way, create a whole wide variety of different products that can be, milled into a flour and applied to all sorts of other products, or be sold as a meat alternative, or as a, not really an alternative, as a plant-based protein in its own right. Another really cool thing about tempeh fermentation is that what happens during the fermentation process is that the mycelium of the mushroom spores effectively wrap the plant-based substrate in this matrix made of pure protein. And that matrix gives tempeh this natural ability to absorb flavor incredibly well, and at the same time, develop this really interesting meaty bite. Is it going to confuse consumers that it's meat? No, but it's certainly far more meaty and far more, it's, I guess, personally speaking, sensorially better than, say, tofu, as you're using the full bean. And going to what Jeremy said about, the microbiome, tempeh, because you're using the full bean, is incredibly high in fiber, which is probably one of that plus, I guess, beneficial microfauna and flora in combination is what constitutes a healthy gut microbiome. So tempeh also has that going for it. But really what we do is that we study what different species of bacteria, yeast, and fungi that we can use in conjunction with the base starter culture and try to select for attributes that we're looking for in our end product.
Thanks. Precision fermentation certainly has this issue of novel food regulation and creating something that is completely new and that hasn't been around and will have to be established. Now your products are on the market and there's no problem with that. But speaking of species and genome libraries and so on, it sounds a bit like it's really deep tech that you're applying to this old technology, or that you're using it, and that you're applying to these old natural ingredients. So is there a problem with this ambivalence a bit that seems to be there between natural and techie, and with the regulation on the one side? I don't think so much, but the consumer acceptance. And would you call it meat alternative in the end, or just something completely new?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for us, I guess, for the consumer, in terms of how we position this product, we just position it as tempeh. We own the fact that we're tempeh, and not, say, this ultra processed or meat alternative. And I think that's one of the most beneficial attributes of these all natural plant-based proteins like tempeh or tofu, or or natural fermented products like kimchi and sauerkraut, is the fact that it really, tempeh is made out of 3 ingredients: starter culture, soybeans, or really any substrate of your choice, and water. And I think that's the main draw. In terms of what actually constitutes the starter culture, of course, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated, but we're not using any like CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing techniques. We're not splicing genomes and adding new genes in. All we're doing is using what nature's given us and mixing and matching, that to produce products that are superior than what they used to be, retrofit tempeh for the modern age. So if people are looking for high protein tempeh, then what we can do is as Jeremy mentioned, with molecular biology techniques, we can understand the mechanisms that these different species of fungi or bacteria, yeast, are able to synthesize protein right through their natural metabolism during the fermentation, and select for the species that do it best. That's all we do. And it's about mixing and matching and seeing how they work in unison with each other to bring out the best in each other. I think a really interesting thing is what happens during the fermentation process is that you create microenvironments, as Jeremy mentioned earlier as well, with lactobacillus and the fermentation of, I guess, kimchi or sauerkraut, is that you create these microenvironments that could work in symbiosis with other species of microorganisms to create a product that's far, far better than if they were to do it alone. And that's really, all we're doing.
Thanks. Maybe this is an easy one. Someone's asking if you can apply your technology to be used for pea protein and rice protein as well, since you're using lupin and soybeans.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I guess what we need to do, though, is bear in mind that these microorganisms need fuel, right? So as long as they're fueled in the right sort of way, with enough, perhaps, carbohydrates within the substrate, so perhaps a concentrate or an isolate may not work of pea protein or rice protein. But as long as there's enough fuel for the microorganisms to metabolize and grow, then yes, absolutely. And we have run experiments on it. It has worked.
Thanks. And on techie, on deep tech, more like a comment here. Someone's saying that industrial winemaking is just as techie, since you select specific lab-produced yeast in order to achieve a certain outcome. So yeah, true. It always depends on the perspective and also with imagination of how things are made, how food is made, and how beverages are made. Actually, you mentioned, and it's always quite surprising when a startup says or company says it's easy to scale. You said this is easy to scale, of course, in precision fermentation, we know, and certainly in other areas, but it's not easy at all to scale things that are able to do in the lab, for example. So what other challenge are there then if the scaling is not the problem for you in the tech and product development?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, in terms of scale, it's when I mean easy, I mean, you go online, search how to make tempeh, and anyone could do it in their own home if they have the right kit. Right, it's really no more complicated. Probably, I'd say arguably less complicated than making your own bread. In fact, where Better Nature first came from was the idea of making this pod that will allow for people to make their own tempeh in their own homes. Right, we had this idea of decentralizing the production of plant-based protein, and that's still something that we hold IP for, something we'd love to bring to market in the future. But in developing that product, that's where we identified the greatest barrier or the challenge, which is market education. Tempeh is not nearly as well known as other plant-based sources of protein like tofu, and isn't able to, say, compete against the likes of texturized pea or soy protein in creating meat alternatives with the same texture and flavor as meat. What we're trying to do here is really create an entirely new category in a market that has never been exposed to tempeh before. So that's been a challenge, but I guess what's helping us are these huge tailwinds, which Fabio mentioned, obviously the rise in plant-based or alternative protein sources, but also, I guess, the tailwinds of people looking for more all-natural, wholesome sources of food that are minimally processed. I think the fact that you can make your own tempeh at home probably lends itself definitely to that narrative. It's just very simple, very clean, good food.
Yeah, thanks. That's true. You can do your own milk proteins at home, at least as of now. We shall see. Okay, thanks, Chris, and to everybody in the audience. We will try to answer all your questions and get on to all of your comments. If not, we will do so after the webinar. Back to Fabio, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Albrecht, and thank you very much, Chris. Since we wanted to show you today the whole spectrum of fermentation, I'm coming now to the one who's really using a traditional technique, Sebastian. For you, it would be very interesting for us to hear more about, since you started already 5 years ago with the whole fermentation part and doing it in a very traditional way. What was your motivation and what were the challenges at the beginning? Were there already a certain customer basis and did you know exactly where to position your product, or was it more like, okay, I see a certain trend that the people want to know more about their food, that they're looking into traditional food crafting, and so here we are with our fermentation products. Maybe you can give us a bit more light in how you developed the story, and of course about the learnings that you had over the past 5 years.
Well, I got involved into the fermentation and the startup by a coincidence of life. I had not planned this, and came from a background which was in agency and sports marketing, and did not have anything to do with fermentation or food. But I met or was introduced to a chef who's today my partner, who was super excited about fermented foods. And he came from high culinary restaurants, Michelin star range. And of course, fermentation and flavors are present there for 10 years, I believe. Noma in Copenhagen and René Redzepi were forerunners in this field. And back then I was in the search of doing something valuable, and starting a startup was always something that I wanted to do. And when I talked to the guy who introduced me to my partner Boris later on, I said, listen, I want to do something tangible, and ideally something that you can feel, smell, and taste. And a small dream of mine has always been to become to own a vineyard or a beer brewery in next life. And when I looked into the vegetable fermentation, I was automatically or instantly feeling like this is very close, because it's bringing food from crop from the field with less transformation and less almost no additives to the plate of the consumer, and in a way which makes it, as I already said, more healthier, and I believe more tastier and exciting. So this is how we started, and we figured the biggest challenge in our field right from the beginning, that back then, although it's no rocket science at all, I guess everybody who studies food technology has courses about fermentation and knows how to do sauerkraut, but no established players in the industry are doing it, at least not doing it without pasteurizing it, or doing it in a wide way with having a whole bunch of numerous or countless bacteria in their product. So in the beginning, already people told us it's impossible. You cannot do this. You cannot bring products like this, living products, into a national distribution, and our goal is to bring it into an international distribution. And I think we've managed this, and figured recipes and ways of fermenting in a hard way. We have thrown away batches that almost make you puke, and where everything gone wrong. But we kept on. We optimized our recipes, and we learned which vegetables with which kind of spices go well, and that quickly brought us into the next challenge, that there was no one producing fermented vegetables for us, so we had to do it ourselves. And I think building up your own food production is a super hard challenge for everybody, especially if you haven't done it before. So that's a big challenge. And another big challenge, and Chris, I don't know, maybe you get me wrong, but I believe our biggest challenge is that fermenting vegetables needs fresh vegetables. And that's our business model is like the key is the sourcing from from farming, and then we also we make it even more difficult. We want to produce or ferment only organic vegetables, which is even harder. So the biggest challenge for us nowadays is really sourcing the big amounts of fresh organic vegetables, mainly from, if possible, from regional harvest in Bavaria, but also during winter months from Spain. And the quality is also a critical factor for fermentation. So we are experiencing that during the summer month, for example, red beets or paprika are containing much more sugar than during winter month. And then all of a sudden you have a completely different fermentation process there. And yeah, so it's pretty basic for the moment, but we are also working on making it more and more food tech. And as Chris already said, key to our business model will be working more with starter cultures. So far, we are relying way too much for the amounts that we are producing on wild fermentation, which is a crazy gamble at times, I believe. So far, it has worked out, knocking on wood. But yeah, we want to work on individualized starter cultures that optimize the product in, as I already said, in two ways. I believe we can optimize texture, color, taste to make it a more delicious product for the consumer itself. But also, I believe we can make the products healthier for the gut microbiome. I believe, or I'm sure they already are, but in the end, we would like to create more, to foster more beneficial bacteria than we might have at the moment in the ferments. And I really believe that one day it will be possible to offer a sauerkraut which is good during pregnancy, and another one which is good to boost your immune system during winter months, and maybe another one which is good to, I don't know, for athletes during hard training sessions whatsoever. So there's so much possibilities there. Last challenge, and maybe Jeremy, before I forget, I will ask you later for an advice for a financeable DNA analysis method that we can do in-house. Because if we were able to see and analyze all our microbial batches, then we would win a lot. And you said, or Fabio, you asked what the two biggest accelerators have been so far. And I believe the third one will be, if it's affordable for startups to know or to really figure out which kind of bacteria you have in your end products.
Sebastian, I hope I don't have such an echo as I had before, otherwise I will change the room. Yeah, I will change the room now. So maybe you can answer it so far, the question. In the last conversation that we had, you told me that the flavor serum is a side product of yours. And since Chris told us that they're using it really to provide fungi, not fungi, the umami taste to their product, is this also an idea that this is maybe the right ingredient or the right supporting part for other alternative protein products?
Definitely, and it's so interesting, and I'm so thankful to be part of this round, because Isabella, I can turn to you and would like to offer you our brine maybe for your products, because if we do tastings with our products, blind tastings, and we try to add flavors or sentiments whatsoever, we find or we discover flavors such as Parmesan cheese, salami, smoke, whatsoever. So all our products are vegan, strictly vegan, but we find these flavors that only come from animal proteins or from animal products, meat mainly, And we believe that we can ferment these flavors from radish, for example, and add certain spices to really offer a natural vegan Parmesan flavor, for example, or a meaty, smoky flavor. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's quite, so if I can add on that, it's quite interesting that you mentioned Parmesan, because that's actually a flavor note that we found in the fermentation of our own products as well. I think, you know, one in the chat, someone mentioned about how we can use precision fermentation or traditional fermentation to generate different kinds of micronutrients. And you know, it's very cool to hear, Sebastian, you're working on selecting for certain cultures, right, to improve, to have certain, I guess, physiological health benefits. For us, we're working on the production of vitamin B12. We actually know we've cracked it. We've got a patent around it, and it took us months to source the right bacteria, right, the right to produce the vitamin B12, because a lot of the bacteria we're using is typically found from dairy cultures, and I mean, cheese is fermented milk. So if Parmesan, so like, you know, the flavors you get from Parmesan, if you feed it the right substrate, you can get those same flavors from vegan sources too. And that's what we found with some of our experiments. They had some really interesting, yet desirable but unintended flavor consequences through the selection of different starter cultures.
Yeah, but Chris, as you said earlier, mix and match, you said, and that's what I said. I think this is a problem, if you want to that way, with us that have or are working on fermented consumer products. As you said, they are already existent for a long time, like tempeh, kimchi, sauerkraut, and so forth. That we are having this in mind, and we're working on consumer products primarily, and we keep out of, or like generating these kinds of flavors that are much more probably than our main products happens by accident, or it just happens and we find out. And it's super difficult for us to become more precision fermentation focused or so.
Yeah, I guess I think for us it was quite interesting because we came at it from the scientific angle. You know, like one of the other co-founders, Amadeus, he's got a PhD on Tempe fermentation. And as part of his PhD, he published what he calls fondly as the Tempe Bible. But what it is really is a review of every single paper that's been published about Tempe fermentation over the last 60 years. So his brain is basically this nexus all about Tempe fermentation. And he came at it from the scientific angle as opposed to, say, you know, the traditional angle. And as a result, we've just been applying scientific methodologies on what is a traditional food product. But I think your vision to create these amazing, not personalized, but these amazing food products with physiological health benefits, could absolutely work. But it may detract from perhaps your current brand positioning, which is what seems like completely all natural and everything else. So I think you just need a molecular biologist on the team and you'll be sorted. But you know, the question you asked Jeremy about how you can do the genetic sequencing in-house, that stuff is easy. That stuff is so easy and so cheap. The difficulty is the understanding of that genomic data, right? I don't know, Jeremy, jump in whenever. But you know, in terms of, because 99.9% of that genomic data will already have been sequenced, already be available in some sort of genome bank. But it's that 0.1% that makes your culture special, that you need to sift through all the stuff that is conserved between your specific starter culture and that of what has already been sequenced. And then you need to figure out how it is that 0.1% of difference generates the I guess, yeah, the qualities that you're interested in investigating further?
Thank you very much, Chris. I hope the echo is now gone on my side. Yeah, okay, that's good to see. Perfect. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how Sebastian comes from the culinary side, and you're more from the science-driven side. And then in the end, the combination of both is maybe the secret that we see here. Coming now to Isabella and Albrecht again. So maybe you can give us also some your view on the topic, Isabella.
Yeah, sure. So I thank you, Chris and Sebastian. I think it's really amazing what you both are working on. Kinoko Labs, we're doing something a little bit different. So we are doing fungal fermentation, but specifically to produce mycelial biomass. So we are in the category of biomass fermentation, which differentiates as well from precision fermentation, such as that is, Perfect Day is using. So we're not using a host yeast organism to create, an animal protein and then extracting that. We're actually trying to get the whole biomass itself, because we want to not only have a product that is, high in protein, but also leverage the inherent fibrous structure that the mycelium can create in its whole state. So our process is a little bit different. We're cultivating pure mycelium, and we're using that as the main ingredient to create more realistically textured meat alternatives. So, we kind of look at the past companies that have, really paved the way for this industry in terms of meat alternatives, ones that have created really realistic burgers that can even bleed, that have this heme protein, and that most consumers, you can see, are adopting in some ways. We see those as really the kind of the first phase of meat alternatives. And what we're trying to create are more realistically textured ones that also fill different categories. So when I started Kinoko Labs, I looked at the market and I saw that there were a lot of burger patties and sausages and nuggets and a lot of these kind of fast food texturized protein products, but I didn't see anything that could replace other center of the plate options like steaks and fillets. And, what about all the whole cuts that are the highest margin and for a lot of people, the most desirable segments of meat, actually. And so that's what we're working to develop at Kinoko Labs. And the way that we do that, a little bit just about our process, is we're working with different strains of filamentous fungi. Similar to Christopher and to Sebastian, we do a bit of mix and matching of our fungal strains to be able to select for ones that can create the type of morphology of our mycelium that we want, but also, ones that are optimizing on flavor or optimizing on, end nutrients. So we're trying, and we also optimize that through our process. So just like a little bit of insight, we take our fungal strains and we're using different types of bioreactors today to cultivate our mycelium by using agro-industrial side streams. So one of the benefits about our process, and one of the things that makes us a very sustainable option, even in comparison to a lot of plant-based products that are out there, is that we can upcycle low-cost biomass and basically turn that into a high-value product through the process of fermentation. So we're able to use that, these types of side streams as our feedstock. And, as Christopher said, these fungal strains, what they need is fuel. And so that side stream, the biomass that we're using, whether from, we can use a lot of different ones. You'll see a lot of brewer spent grain, for example, side streams from agri-food industries. You feed that to the fungi and they break it down and essentially use that as fuel to replicate and to exponentially and rapidly grow. So we're able to upcycle a side stream, rapidly grow our mycelium, and then essentially we harvest that. And in its natural form, it's already something that is filamentous in structure. So it already has something that is fibrous. We don't need to extrude the biomass that we're creating. And that's a major leap above other plant-based products that are out there. We want to cut down on processing. So, the segment of the market and the people who we're trying to see as our main consumers or our future customers are really people who are looking at plant-based alternatives today and thinking that, they're great, they taste really good, they're convenient, maybe they fit into their price point, but they look at the ingredient label and they see that it's ultra processed and that there's, 40 ingredients that they can't even pronounce or that they don't even know what this is, right? We're really trying to create cleaner products that are minimally processed that can still actually, fill that need for a meat alternative that is not tofu, for example. So, a little bit more realistic than tofu, but also not a cultured meat company. So I think that when I look at the alternative protein industry, I see plant-based products that are out there. I see, the cultured meat companies that are coming out and producing hyper-realistic meat, from a cellular level, it is meat. And then I see that there's a little bit of a gap. People are going to want alternatives that are still, mimicking meat, can function the same, can taste, meaty and have, give them that meat experience and fill that gap for themselves. But maybe they don't want something that is actually meat. There's going to be people, I think, who, perhaps down the line won't accept those types of products as well. And so we're really fitting into that niche category that I believe won't actually be so niche. I think it's going to be mainstream. And so our products, because we are trying to take mass consumers, we're really trying to appeal to mass consumers because that's where we see we can make the biggest impact. We need to give them products that they can use in their day-to-day lives, right? The same way that they use meat today. And that's why we're trying to, that's why we're developing the products that we are today. But yeah, a little bit back to our process. We take our mycelium once it's harvested in its pure form. So it's a pure mycelium, which is a little bit different just for the audience to understand from Christopher's process, because what they do through Tempeh, like he said, is they inoculate beans, for example. And so that's it's a mix between a pure plant protein and mycelium. Ours is that we're cultivating pure mycelium, and then we take that and we harvest it, and then we mix in high quality ingredients, in a minimal percentage actually, to create our end products. Yeah. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's a little bit about our process. The types of products that we're creating today. Like I said, we're going to be showcasing more of them in January. So our goal is to be able to actually start scaling up to pilot production as well, more towards the end of 2022, which is when we want to be also testing our products with consumers.
Yeah, it's awesome to see how far along you are now, because you've done a lot since we started to work together as well, like at the beginning of the year. It is at the same time a very long process, of course, from the your ideation stage to the actual going to market at some point. But it's great to see that. But still, your mission is so ambitious. Be on the same level regarding taste, texture, nutrition, and also price. So again, the challenge of scaling this up.
Yeah.
Can you go a bit into more detail here, how you're doing this and how it's possible to tick all these boxes?
Yeah, exactly. I think so. Scaling is not going to be easy. I think for my perspective, for any fermentation company, maybe with Christopher's company where it's more traditional Tempe fermentation, I can see that as definitely being maybe less challenging than the endeavor that we're taking on. But I think when you compare it to other types of fermentation, other types of alternative protein players in the industry, such as cultured meat companies, right? It's a very different type. It's a very different challenge. So our scale up is going to look like, having to scale up the types of bioreactors and essentially just upscaling the amount of biomass that we can harvest or we can cultivate at a time. The challenge there, it will essentially be, making sure that our process can be replicated at a higher scale each time. So we'll go from lab scale to pilot to industrial. I think the challenge is not so much going to be not going to be as much there as it will be in scaling up and taking our ingredient and in the post-processing step, turning it into our end products. So, we can do that at lab scale, but what I see as a challenge in the industry, overall, and I think not only, Chignal Labs, but pretty much any player that is really trying to do something new like we are, is going to be fitting into, existing production facility lines, fitting into the existing supply chain with CMOs today, because we're essentially producing an ingredient that likely, perhaps, has not been used, or at least hasn't been used for the purpose that we're using it for. So we're going to need to find partners and CMOs that can, take what we're working with and integrate it and adapt it into their processes in the future. Unless we, have the opportunity to build our own production facility from scratch, like Sebastian, but our goal is to be able to, at least in the beginning, partner and work with CMOs to be able to, to be able to not have to invest a ton of CapEx at an early stage. Yeah.
One question, Isabella, regarding this, wouldn't it make sense, since you're leveraging a side stream from certain production areas, to really locate it at the point of origin? So not at the production side, more at the side where the side stream or your biomass is coming from, so that you have because you can reallocate your plant wherever you want, and so it would make more sense to really cut the lead time and to go to where the biomass is coming from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That is very much within our strategy, is when we're looking to actually, build facilities or set up our pilot production next year. We are precisely looking at the landscape of where are the suppliers of our side streams and our inputs actually going to be located, and locating ourselves strategically where they are, because like you said, cut down on that time for us to actually get that main biomass ingredient feedstock for us, and get it into our process much easier. So yes, that is what we're planning to do, actually.
Is it easy to get access to those side streams or value streams, as they are called, because they're already being used by different industries, as we know? So it's not like waste anymore.
Yeah. I don't think. I mean, I don't describe anything as easy in what we're doing.
maybe we got it wrong there with Chris. Nothing is easy here. Everything is super difficult.
Everything
for sure.
is difficult. I think the challenge is less getting in touch with the suppliers and more about actually the steps that we need to take when we get that raw biomass, for example, and then have it prepared to be used in our own fermentation process, because there are pre-processing steps that we need to take in order for that, feedstock to be, for example, sterilized or, ready to use, so that we are avoiding issues of contamination down the line. Yeah, that's more the challenge, is, the additional steps that we would have to take to make it a circular and sustainable product, as opposed to just using, for example, like glucose in our product, which would be, the easy solution there.
Yeah, so it will be even more impactful, of course, if these streams could be used in a different way than they're often used nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. The idea is really to, the end goal is that we want to make this as sustainable as a product and process as possible. So it is really key for us to be able to incorporate these side streams into our process. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Isabella.
Yeah,
I would say now, if there's questions across the panel, that would be quite interesting again to our recommendations, and also, of course, from the audience. We've got a lot of questions answered already by our panelists. Thanks a lot for that. That's awesome. And we've got a few remaining questions that we'll try to tackle later. But anything across the panel that makes sense at this point, or questions from you, Isabella, to your colleagues? No worries. You don't have to. Just find it interesting, something a bit more interactive than just us, asking questions.
Yeah, I guess I am curious about Better Nature, what you're working on in terms of, what do you see the future of your products looking like if you, because I think it's funny, like you mentioned that what you're doing is somewhere in between what we're working on, maybe, or a precision fermentation company, and what Sebastian is working on. And I see what we're working on is somewhat in between what you're doing and a cultured meat company, where we're kind of in that middle part there. But, you know, what do you envision as the future of your products? You know, if you're trying to create something that is, you know, still has its, you know, roots in traditional fermentation and traditional tempeh making, but trying to create, like you said, a new category entirely, because I think we're in that similar position as well.
Yeah, I think for us, the vision is to make tempeh a mainstream food ingredient. And to start off with, that means popularizing tempeh as a source of plant-based protein, because that is the most straightforward, most best understood application of tempeh and tempeh fermentation is to make, not meat replicas or meat alternatives, but to make sensitive plant-based protein similar to that to tofu, but just better in almost every single way, but not so close to meat as, you know, like your products. But moving on from there, I think using tempeh fermentation as a platform to create ingredients derived from side streams, right? So that's something, I think someone asked a question about that. This is something we're currently exploring, and have actually recently been awarded a grant to pursue that further, which is really exciting. But yeah, to use side streams or other low-cost commodity crops to valorize their, you know, to basically improve their value, to be applied into a whole wide and loads of different other food categories, aside from, say, the chilled cabinet where meat alternatives or plant-based proteins would sit. And really the reason why we're looking into that side of the business, or looking to sort of perhaps establish an ingredients play, is because fundamentally what tempeh fermentation does is that it creates all natural, delicious, and nutritious plant-based protein. You know, and what we could do with that protein is desiccate it, mill it to a flour, and incorporate it into other food sources or food products. Another really interesting thing I think we didn't mention here, aside from improving nutritional quality, improving flavor profile, I think a really, really interesting thing about about fermentation in general is that it naturally modifies the structure of the proteins. I mean, I think this probably applies more to Sebastian and my work as opposed to yours, Isabella, because you're using the full protein. But for us, you know, effectively what happens during tempeh fermentation or during really any bacterial or yeast fermentation is that some level of protease activity is applied to the substrate. So some denaturation of the protein occurs. And when these proteins denature, they sort of, their structures unfold and they exhibit more aliphatic, I'm getting really scientific, but they exhibit better, they're able to hold fat better, right? By basically unfurling themselves. So what we're actually looking to do is select for the emulsification capacity, or select for starter cultures that can massively increase the emulsification capacity of our plant-based substrate, such that we can create an ingredient that could potentially be applied to drink applications or butter applications. So I think that's some, you know, beyond just nutritional quality and then flavor, there are also some really other interesting, I guess, properties of fermentation that can be explored further to create even more interesting products.
Terrific pro-fermentation rant. Thanks, Chris. Jeremy, you were saying. Jeremy, you want to add something?
Oh, I just wanted to say, just to follow up and say that I had examples of biomass fermentation, so I had not neglected that to mention that at the beginning, but or meant to skip that. But I wanted to follow up and say Chris's point about actually it ties into both what Chris and Isabella were saying, and that is, I mean, the sort of mycelium-based fermentation is a great example of it's almost like a transformation. So you can think of that type of that part of fermentation as sort of like a conversion process. You're taking proteins from a plant that may not be, as Chris was starting to get into, may have certain properties that aren't all that great. Maybe it's not so digestible, in the human body, or maybe it's not all that water soluble, or maybe, there are parts of it that just sort of pass right through the gut that are not touched. So by doing sort of a conversion process using something like a fungus or a bacterium too, you can transform the quality of that protein, make it more nutritious, more available to digestion. So it's actually increasing the sort of the value of the protein. So there's that, and also there's an enrichment of protein when you're actually consuming the mycelium themselves. So Chris mentioned the enrichment. I think that's a key point, because oftentimes getting enough protein can be difficult for vegetarians and vegans, and because you'd have to consume so much plant matter in order to get the kind of protein levels that you need. And so by consuming something like mycelium that's already done that enrichment for you, per gram, you're consuming a lot more protein. If you eat, a gram of say Isabella's product or Tempeh from Chris, you're per gram, you're consuming a much higher amount of protein when you eat that, even if the fungus has been grown on the very same plant source. If you were to just eat the plant source, you'd have to eat a lot more of it. So it's that protein enrichment. And then when you talk about valorization, so sort of like side streams, then you're talking about sort of a double value add there. You're taking waste materials, things that would just be thrown away. You're turning them into something that's not only consumable, but highly enriched in protein. So there's a double win there. I would want to ask, this is just a question for Isabella, just on the use of side streams, is there, ideally the consumption of meat, of animal meat, will be reduced in the coming years, especially with new technologies like this. And then so in theory, there's going to be a lot of corn sugar in the US anyway, available, because farmers won't want to decrease the amount of that they're producing, even though we'd want them to. But so I'm wondering about the like, it's great to use the side streams, but I'm wondering whether, at least at a large scale, whether that will be, other than for marketing purposes, whether there will be a real advantage there, because the cost of corn is going to go through the floor if less animal meat is being produced. So why not just use a relatively homogeneous input source, like all the excess corn that's probably going to be thrown away? Maybe then it becomes a valorization of the corn.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, maybe that is the future thing that we need to valorize. No, it's a really great point. And I think you kind of answered that question right in your last statement, that we actually are testing the homogenized sources. Like we are testing with glucose and other types of more traditional sources that are used in industrial biotechnology, right? But we're also testing side streams to see how versatile are the strains that we're working with. Can they be used on multiple different streams that would allow us to have connect to feedstock in different regions as well. So we're doing quite a bit of testing, but one of our base testing and our almost control is done with the homogenized sources, that we also have that as a benchmark to work with. And I think just from a logic perspective, I really agree with your last take, that if in the future it makes more sense and it's actually more sustainable, that we need to be using these homogenized sources like a glucose media to actually use, then that's something that we consider at that point. Also, I think for any company that has really high sustainability goals and values at heart, we're still startups, and that is our ultimate vision, but we also know that we have to take steps along the way to get there. And the only way we're going to get there and succeed in becoming, this ultimately, very sustainable company is that we need to survive. So, these things are in our pipeline, our R&D and our product development pipeline. But, we will get there along the way. So we're not going to be everything that we envision at day one, right? But we're testing, and that's part of, our development every day here. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, of course, thanks.
Do we have one more time or enough time for one more follow-up?
Yeah, we have to hurry up a little bit, but if you can do that, that's fine. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I have also a final question for you, Jeremy. So, but please do a follow-up.
Oh, Sebastian, I just wanted to say that you and I can talk after the the conversation today about microbial ecology of different products. But I think it's a fascinating topic and not really one that's been investigated too much. And I think that it's going to become more and more important. And I think also that there's a real sort of a regional element to it. So we touched on that a little bit, Sebastian, you did, but in the same way that, wine from a certain part of Germany or a certain part of, France has a different terroir to it, because it has the certain soil and the certain water, quality. I think that a certain fermentation could have a certain quality because it comes from a certain region of the country. And so you might have a sort of a, cultures from different places having different characters.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jeremy. That was also a great summary for how or what we can expect in the upcoming years. From a technological view, you said right at the beginning that you want to give us an outlook, what we do expect in the next couple of years. Where do you see the biggest developments? This is the one question that I have to you. And the second one is, what kind of supporting technologies, solutions, and providers do you expect also in the upcoming years that support the sector, the growth in the sector, and a bit more the acceleration also when it comes to precision fermentation?
I would say that there are two things sort of really come to mind immediately for the future. And that is, I think that basically we are massively undersupplied in terms of capacity around the world for fermentation. The things, and maybe it's not so much of a concern for some of the technologies we've talked about here today, but when we're talking about precision fermentation, especially if we're talking about making proteins or making molecules of interest, we're talking about fermentation tanks, and there's only so much volume currently available. I did just a back of the envelope calculation on, this sort of precision fermentation of milk. And if you were to try to make all of the milk protein that was made for a year, and I think 2013 is the data that I got from the UN, all of the milk across the whole globe, if you tried to make all of that milk protein using a standard fermentation with Pichia pastoris and a fed batch system, sort of a standard precision fermentation option like Perfect Day does, you would need to have titers of 5,000 grams per liter. And right now, a very excellent titer would be 5 grams per liter. So in other words, we're 1,000 times low on the fermentation capacity that we would need just to make milk proteins. And that's assuming that we could just, take over all the fermenters from all the Cargills and the DuPonts and everybody's fermenters and just say, we're going to make milk proteins now. The amount of capacity that is available is very, very much in short supply, especially for smaller companies that are in that space between we can make this in a bench scale fermenter, and we have an idea of how to make it in a pilot. Maybe we've had 1 or 2 runs in a pilot, but how do we go from that to a commercial scale? And the fermenter systems just aren't available, and the technical skills just aren't there. So it becomes a matter of really prioritizing this, at a higher level, finding ways that we can get to that increase the capacity. And the second sort of challenge I would say for the future is the formulation. A lot of formulations, again, maybe not so relevant to some of the technologies we've been talking about today, but for precision fermentation especially, a lot of the formulations, the media that you need to give to the organism has to have certain components into it. And it has to have vitamins in a certain ratio, has to have, nitrogen sources that can be expensive, sugar of some kind of purification quality. So the inputs are often very well defined. And where are you getting those highly purified ingredients? It's often from a process that is, very industrial. Maybe there's not enough available for all the fermentation we'd like to do. So I think that's an issue. There has to be work done to figure out ways to do some of these fermentations to make a product with less defined inputs. So a little bit more sort of a messy process upstream than asking for, certain vitamins in your recipe, et cetera. And then going forward, from a technological perspective, I really think, two things that could help. One would be, well, it's really the same. It's really the same technology. It's, it's a machine learning sort of an approach where you're getting to the point where you can, with the reduced capacity, what the most important thing is that your batch is consistent and that it doesn't fail. And so something like a machine learning, sort of very, fancy sort of a bioprocess approach like that can really help on the industrial scale and the commercial scale where you're producing, 100,000 liter fermentation. And if it fails, it's a big deal. And so when you have, advanced sort of computational techniques like that, you can really get to a place where you're producing every batch in consistent batch to batch fashion and without failures, so that you maximize your throughput, your productivity, and you reduce your losses. So I really think that we're starting to see that Siemens is really involved in really pushing the envelope in this area. A few other companies are starting to make inroads and really trying to take a highly computational sort of a machine learning approach to the bioprocess.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeremy. That was very helpful and very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for putting things into perspective, because after all, we've learned, I think, today that for sure it's not about the hype for, about fermentation. That's been a bit also of a question if it's a bit too much, if it's been a bit too much recently, with everything in every startup that makes the fermentation can definitely get a certain level of attention nowadays. But we've seen that it's really, really important and has a huge potential. And at the same time, Jeremy, it's just the beginning. And even though there's more and more money now going into this field, and it's growing fast compared to plant-based and to celiac that has its own problems, especially regarding scale up and funding. It's still a lot of work needs to be done in the area of fermentation. So yeah, that was awesome. Thank you all. Just again, we want to talk about precision fermentation in another webinar edition, and stay tuned for that. We'll let you know in the coming weeks. And yeah, thanks so much from my side to Fabio for co-hosting this again, to the panel, and to the amazing audience that was so much interested and active here today.
Thank you very much also from my side, and feel free to follow us on all our channels to stay tuned. This video was recorded, so we had a lot of insights here. You will see it on the ProVeg YouTube channel, so there you can also see the recording. Thank you very much, Jeremy, Sebastian, Chris, and Isabella. This was very, very insightful, and exactly more than I expected, because the discussion over the whole spectrum, it's really amazing to see the culinary and the technological side of fermentation. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thanks you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Great. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.